Out of every version of World of Warcraft that exists, there's one that really stands out to me. It's not trying to rush you to the endgame, there's no real set path to follow. Oh, and there's one other rather small detail: your character has one life. I'm of course talking about hardcore. Back then, hardcore World of Warcraft originally started as a pure community initiative. They were using an add-on to try and keep people honest and consistent with the rules of the challenge. And though these rules have changed over time, hardcore has always remained a game mode that's been quietly waiting for its time to shine once again. And hardcore has definitely had its moments where it not only felt like one of the more popular game modes in Classic, but I reckon it attracted people from around the World of Warcraft sphere to give this unique challenge a go. After all, we've all seen the random clips online of the creative ways people find to fail the hardcore challenge, and you think to yourself, I could probably do better than that. And whilst the War Within is in its peak hype phase at the moment with its release, hardcore World of Warcraft has very much been on the rise in the background, and it's been seeing a ton of players return to this unique game mode and preparing to go again once again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the recent rise in the popularity of the hardcore scene, go over why this is happening now, and ultimately whether you should think about trying this challenge out for yourself. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Factor 75. Factor 75 are pretty much a regular on this channel at this point in time, and for good reason. Factor 75 offer delicious and dietitian approved meals which are delivered straight to your doorstep. These meals are calorie counted, and there's a menu that rotates weekly to keep options fresh. And there are a bunch of options ranging from keto, calorie smart, vegan, vegetarian and more. In a busy world, Factor 75 provide that convenience to make mealtime quick, easy and organised. No more random takeouts or forgetting to buy that one thing from the store you wanted. Everything will be in the fridge and ready to go. And the best part is that all the food is ready in around 2 minutes or so. It's microwavable food, but just not in the way that you've seen it before. So why not give them a try? You can go to my link and get 50% off your first Factor 75 box and 20% off your next month's orders. Many thanks to Factor 75 for the sponsor today. Let's get on back to WoW. First up, and very much worth a mention, is that now there are official hardcore servers, and I just want to let you know about them if you haven't played the game mode before, or maybe you just haven't played it in a long time. You'll find these servers under the WoW Classic part of the Battle.net launcher, and then you just go on Realm List and you'll see the hardcore tab at the bottom. In terms of server populations, typically Stitches was the more populated server on EU and Defias Pillager on NA. I expect that to remain consistent as well. As far as rules on Blizzard's hardcore servers, there's literally one of them: don't die. Everything else is fine. You can group, trade, whatever you want. There is, however, the more recent addition called the self-found mode. Now this is a bit closer to how the unofficial servers worked, and in this mode you cannot trade, use the mailbox, or use the auction house. Definitely more time intensive than regular hardcore is, as you'll be fully responsible for everything you need, from health pots, profession gear, leveling your first aid, the whole lot. You can still group for content such as open world elites or dungeons though. As for the population of current hardcore servers, it's a bit harder to say than it is with normal versions of World of Warcraft. Usually we can take a look at the number of people who are logged as raiding on sites such as ironforge.pro and build some kind of population profile around that. It's not exactly the most accurate, I know, but it's what we have to go off of. If I were to go on Stitches EU at the moment though, I can see some 24,000 or so item listings on the auction house, which isn't bad for a server where everyone has one life. Remember, if your main dies with listings active, they just disappear into the void. But even better than that, if we start doing some /who checks on starter zones such as Elwyn Forest, Dunmora or Teldrassil, you can see there are actively loads of low-level characters starting off their hardcore journeys once again, with tons of these low-level zones having the /who cap of 50 players showing, especially during peak times in the evening. There's a decent population on Horde too. It just just tends to be the case that Horde is a bit less played on the hardcore side of things, as typically Alliance is seen as the safer and just better option when it comes to endgame. Most characters are never going to reach endgame in the first place, so it doesn't really matter, but hey, that's just the way it is. Also, I'm just saying, if I'm going to play and potentially replay a bunch of low-level zones again and again, I'm going to take Westfall, Red Ridge and Duskwood, that whole loop of gameplay, over the Barrens any day. We even know that back then Blizzard ended up putting too much time into the early game Alliance leveling experience, and it sure does show, at least for me. And although hardcore can be quite the solo player experience at times, depending on how you choose to play it of course, but it's just nice having other people around, seeing other people in the zone, having the option to do group quests, finding dungeons and so on. It makes it feel like a more active world, and that's just part of what makes an MMO what it is really. Also worth a mention, there is one particular add-on you should get for sure if you're planning on playing hardcore, called a death log. This lets you see other players' deaths out in the world as notifications, and gives you a bunch of stats on things such as most deadly creatures, most dangerous zones, which classes tend to do the best, and so on. You can also change the minimum death level to display through the add-on options on the Death Alert Part 2. I remember when hardcore was super active, you would literally get spammed with notifications if this was set to level 1, and at some point it got a bit much, but hey, we'll see how it goes. Either way, I just wanted to let you know about this add-on. I can recommend it, it definitely adds to the hardcore experience. So why is this whole hardcore thing picking up now? Why are people looking back to this game mode? I think in many ways it was kind of inevitable that hardcore was going to see a resurgence eventually. If anything, this is happening sooner than I thought it would have. The nature of this game mode means there's no real sense of missing out or falling behind, and it's not like the world will be forced into TBC hardcore, or it's impossible to play with a low population. Hardcore is just there, much like Classic Era, and it'll carry on being there whether you want to go back to it today or in 6 months' time. And it's just different to other versions of WoW, and offers people who want that long leveling journey an alternative goal to what you typically have. You can really invest yourself into a character. Each item upgrade you get feels as though it's a big deal. You can notice it when you're out in the world grinding. You can take time to work on your professions to make sure you have target dummies if you're engineering, for example, and it makes you approach situations which you might have done a dozen times already that little bit differently. You think about mob respawns, enemies that run in fear and where they're going to go to, and planning the escape route out of a cave if everything ends up going terribly wrong. Because at its core, vanilla World of Warcraft is a very simple game. Back in the day, Blizzard designed this game to be way more casual friendly than its MMO competitors. World of Warcraft had no experience debts or penalties, no having to relearn abilities, no losing gear, but at the same time there's so much to know that the game just doesn't tell you, like how mob leashing works, knowing which enemies are immune to which effects, and how, well, threat works in its entirety. There's a different level of skill to hardcore, and a lot of it comes from your game knowledge, which typically can be useful in vanilla, but it's not really going to make or break your experience if your character dies. I also think hardcore captures the essence of what vanilla World of Warcraft is even better than the regular servers. These days there's a lot of obsession with gameplay being reaching a set of goals in the most efficient way possible. It's almost as though the game becomes a checklist of things to do just so you can log out as soon as possible. Now of course everyone can play the game in the way they want, that's fine, but when every other dungeon is some kind of spell cleave or a boost run or something's hard reserved, you know what I mean, it ends up kind of warping the game around it. Hardcore forces you to slow down. It makes you more interested in building relationships with people you meet out in the world when you're doing group quests or dungeons, and it makes the more higher level and geared players more impressive, just as they would have been back in the day where most of us were clueless noobs wandering around the world. When you see that guy who's level 60 with an epic mount and raid gear on hardcore, that really means something. They've taken a character to a point where very few people reach and risked everything in the hardest content vanilla has to offer. And before you say, oh but vanilla's so easy, I don't know if you've raided vanilla. Even with world buffs, it's extremely easy to die if you or even somebody else makes a small mistake. And yes, in case you're wondering, people have cleared all the raiding content in hardcore guilds now, including Kel'Thuzad and Naxxramas. So it's definitely possible, it just takes a whole lot of time, effort, and careful planning. So should you give the hardcore challenge a go then? Who is this thing really for? Well, I think if you're playing World of Warcraft for the first time or you're a newer player, it's probably going to be a bit of a difficult starting point. Even low-level enemies are disproportionately strong compared to your own character, a lesson you will learn very early on, and you might find yourself back on the journey to your starting zone again faster than you realize. But maybe that will give you the motivation to go again and do better. That really is what hardcore is all about. If you are a regular vanilla player or somebody who feels as though they've done it all in vanilla and you want some kind of different challenge, I reckon for you hardcore fits very well. It's familiar enough to where game knowledge will be able to carry you a decent amount, but it will challenge you in new ways which ordinarily you just wouldn't have to think about on your regular 1 to 60 journey. I also think it's a good break from other endgame focused versions of World of Warcraft, where everything can feel very go 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 all of the time. In hardcore it's much more about your personal journey leveling, rather than having that feeling you need to be keeping up in terms of gear, in terms of patch updates, raids and so on. Saying all this, Blizzard is constantly making sure that there's something happening in World of Warcraft these days. There's the upcoming retail expansion, The War Within, there's going to be Firelands and Kata Classic sometime in October, as per Blizzard's roadmap, and there'll be Phase 5 with Blackwing Alert in Season of Discovery in the near future as well. But whenever you do decide to go back, if you do, hardcore is something that will be there, and as we're at the moment, its population is growing once again. So I reckon after the initial War Within hype phase, it's gonna see an even bigger growth. You should also know there is a big streamer-led project starting again on hardcore servers in October. I believe this is taking place on North American servers, but there may be some kind of counterpart thing on EU as well. I don't know, it's still a little while off in the future. Hardcore has always been super popular from a content point of view because people just love seeing the death clips and having people risk these characters. So I expect a good number of people to follow along and to be restarting hardcore in October due to that. But that is about everything. Hardcore servers are on the rise once again. It's a good time to hop back in whenever, but I reckon October will end up being the peak return to hardcore. Saying that, there really is never a bad time to start or restart if you want to, but it does feel that bit better when the early game zones are busy, you can group up for stuff, and the Deathlog add-on is constantly going off. I reckon I'll be giving hardcore another go around October, probably on a self-found character this time around, just for the change of pace. So let me know if you're thinking of giving hardcore a try anytime soon, or maybe even if you never left and it's still your main way to play World of Warcraft, in the comments down below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you on the next one very soon.